Welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Thank you so much for joining us for another segment. In this segment, we're going to be speaking with Dr. Eran Eden. He's joining us here as co-founder and CEO of MeMed to talk about MeMed BV. It's the first technology that'll detect in 15 minutes at point of care if a patient has a bacterial or viral infection and inform clinical decision makers how to treat. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Dr. Eran Eden. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us a look into your background and talk about the origin story for MeMed.
Absolutely. So as you said, I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of MeMed. Previous lifetime academia, the Technion Israel Institute of Technology and the Weizmann Institute, trained both as a molecular biologist and a computer scientist. And basically a game that I started together with co-founder Dr. Kfir Ovid in his grandmother's kitchen. Roughly a decade ago, that game started to grow gradually. Fast forward 10 years into the future, that basically became a company called MeMed with a product that has just received a landmark FDA clearance for distinguishing between bacterial and viral etiologies based on the body's immune response. With the aid or with the aim of empowering physicians to make better informed antibiotic treatment decisions.
So what is the goal of MeMed? You started this company, as you say, in one of your friend's grandmother's kitchen. What is the ultimate goal of this company?
MeMed is based on a simple idea, which is that the body's immune system is built to communicate what's going on. And our mission is to listen and to transform the signals of the immune response into products that can potentially help manage patients, particularly in the context of acute infections and inflammatory disorders. And so while this is a very broad idea, there's actually a very simple, down-to-earth problem that you can use this type of paradigm or concept to try to go after.
Is the early detection of any virus just as crucial as the early detection, say, in cancer? Is that a crucial area when it comes to treating infections?
Yeah, well, listening to the immune response, you can use that to try to tackle multiple problems, whether it's early diagnosis of cancer and other diseases. We decided to go for a seemingly simple problem. Say a child with a fever without source presenting to the emergency department, or maybe an elderly patient with a cough presenting to the urgent care. I say seemingly simple problem because this particular clinical scenario occurs quite often and has quite a lot of ramifications. And the first problem we went after is whether that patient in front of us with suspected infection, whether they have a bacterial or viral etiology, by treat or not treat with antibiotics. Again, I say seemingly simple problem because bacterial and viral infections are often clinically indistinguishable. Now, there's many solutions out there to try to figure out whether you have a bacterial or viral infection, from culture to PCR to rapid antigen tests, and they're all really helping us try to move the field forward and empowering physicians to make better informed day-to-day decisions. There's still several gaps that remain that the immune response is very well suited to try to overcome health. First one, and that's one of the reasons we chose this particular indication, is time to resolve. So we want to have the solutions within ideally minutes, not hours, and definitely not days. Measuring the immune response is actually something, if you have the right technology, you can do that within minutes. Second, you want to be able to diagnose inaccessible infections. For example, ear infections, otitis media, sinusitis, bronchitis, pneumonia, and often the infection site is not readily accessible. By using the immune response, you can actually leverage the fact that the immune system circulates through the entire body and tells you what happens in those inaccessible infection sites. Third, there's the issue of colonization or carriage, natural flora. So even if you sample, say, the respiratory tract of a 2-year-old child and you identify a certain virus, say a rhinovirus, that doesn't mean that rhinovirus is causing the disease, because we have very high rates of colonization or natural flora from multiple viruses and bacteria. Furthermore, co-infections. Let's say you have a viral organism detected again in the respiratory tract, it doesn't necessarily rule out a bacterial infection. In using the immune response, gives you a clever way to try to overcome that because it knows whether that virus is a bystander or not, and it knows whether on top of a virus there's a bacterial co-infection. So the reason we chose to go after this problem is twofold. Number one, we thought that this was a problem that created a pretty big burden on the healthcare system and on patients, arguably one of the most prevalent indications on Earth, a child with sniffles or adult with cough. And second, using the immune response is uniquely suited to try to complement what's out there today. So it's a combination of identifying the right problem plus using the right technology to solve the problem. That's why we chose this particular indication.
As far as MeMed BV, how does it work using the body's immune response to make better treatment decisions?
Okay, so when we set on this journey, we imagined this small benchtop device that within a few minutes and a small volume of blood would help us initially create let's say an answer or insights on whether or not the body is waging a war on a bacteria or a virus, and by empowering physicians to decide whether to treat or not with antibiotics. In a second, it can actually use this to tackle additional problems. The question is, how do you reduce that to practice? Ideas are cheap. Making products is extremely hard in our domain. Again, it took us nearly a decade from an idea and a napkin to a full-fledged product. So initially, you have to figure out what you're going to measure. It took us about 4 or 5 years to run large discovery studies, arguably one of the largest proteomic screening ever to be conducted of the human response to infections. We measured multiple proteins, hundreds of thousands bioinformatically, and then hundreds in a more quantitative manner. And at the end of this long process, we identified 3 proteins that work as a team quite accurately to distinguish between these two conditions, bacterial versus viral etiologies. The first protein is called Trail. It's a protein that goes up in your body when you have a viral infection. It goes down in your body when you have a bacterial infection, whether you're a 3-month-old baby or a 93-year-old lady, whether you're a hypochondriac that comes after they sneeze, or somebody comes after a week, different ethnic groups, different type of infections, whether it's influenza A, influenza B, RSV. So this is today arguably the first virally-induced protein that's cleared by FDA as part of a bigger signature. That's one of the pillars of the signature. And again, we identified or uncovered some of the properties of this particular protein that was known more in the context of oncology. The second protein has been around for about 40 years. It's called C-reactive protein. That goes predominantly in inflammation and in bacterial infections. And the third protein is called IT10. That protein goes up in viruses and generally in infection, particularly in situations of lung injury. And then when you measure these 3 proteins and you add on top of that the right machine learning algorithms, this produces a score between 0 and 100. The higher the score, the higher the likelihood of a bacterial infection. Bacterial and viral co-infections will also receive a high score because you want to treat with antibiotics. So the technology basically measures those proteins. Second, we can see how it actually does that, but it measures the box that measures those proteins and combines them using the machine learning algorithm to produce a score that has a value in terms of making real decisions or supporting these decisions.
What do you feel the future plans are with MeMed BV, and how do you plan to distribute it to clinics around the world?
Okay, so a missing piece of the puzzle is, okay, how do you actually measure those proteins? Without going too much into the technology, what I can say is, again, that in the last 7 years, we developed a platform called the MeMed Key. MeMed Key basically is a small benchtop device. It can be placed, say, in a central lab or maybe at the ED or in an urgent care. And that small benchtop device, you basically plug a cartridge and put 100 microliters of serum and plug it into the device, and then you get the results within 15 minutes, sample to answer, once you put the serum sample. In terms of bringing this to patients, this is too broad of an indication for a single entity to go at it by itself. So we have a dual strategy. There's certain parts of the market and certain geographies where we go by ourselves with this platform, with a MeMed Key. And there's certain areas where we go with strategic partners. So, for example, in the U.S. and in Europe, we're going into certain market segments, particularly in emergency departments, as an example, with our own platform, either with a direct sales force or with distributors. To cover labs that require much higher volume, we've also partnered with additional large in vitro diagnostic players, such as DiaSorin, to put it on their large automated immunoassay machines that are installed in over 8,500 hospitals or labs in the U.S. and Europe, and that's covering the more high-volume type of settings. And today, we're also creating additional partnerships to make sure that we can reach additional settings. At the end of the day, this is such a prevalent indication that it covers multiple settings, and it's really important in different geographies. There is no one platform that can cover everything. So use our platform for some segments and partnerships for other segments.
Well, if you would, give us a website where our listeners can learn more about your company and about the technology that you're developing there.
Absolutely. www.med.com.
Well, I appreciate you joining us here on the program, Eran. I'm hoping that we can speak again as MeMed BV advances throughout the country and the world.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Dr. Eran Eden, co-founder and CEO of MeMed. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, listen in, download it, SoundCloud, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Health Professional Radio.